Well, we are very fortunate today. I heard Connie Young Yu speak at the Washington High School Hall of Merit Award banquet. I was mesmerized. She is a fourth generation San Franciscan and Californian and is a writer and historian. And she is dedicated to telling the stories of people who've been excluded from the American narrative. To that end, she is the author of Chinatown San Jose, U.S.A. She is an activist. I think it got started at Washington High School, from what I remember. And she was on the Citizens Committee that saved the Angel Island Immigration Station detention barracks from demolition. And she was a founder of Asian Americans for Community Involvement, which we are now hearing a lot about, AACI. Connie was honored to be the representative for the descendants of the Chinese railroad workers when the Department of Labor honored them. She is a trustee, and I hope I say this right, of the Hakone Foundation, and is a board member emeritus of the Chinese Historical Society of America. That's her national prominence. Connie Young Yu has lived a story herself that is fascinating and frustrating, full of twists and turns, rewards and awards. So please join me in welcoming a local, but now international journalist, historian, and a preeminent educator, Connie Young Yu.
Thank you so much, Susan. What a great introduction. I loved all of your stories, because in meeting you, it's just wonderful. You know, you've traveled so much, you're at different places. I've always felt I've been stuck in the same old village. And now I just love this village because it is a great village. And the village I'm talking about is Asian America in San Francisco Bay Area. And I love it. You know, you're all involved and connected to oral history. And last week I gave a talk at San Jose State University for a course called Oral History and Activism. And to me, this is unbelievable that I didn't even know that what I was doing had a name, oral history. And it's something that I've been conducting ever since, I guess, I was a toddler listening to my grandparents' stories. And when I was asked to speak for the senior assembly at George Washington High School, you know, I was told to say something to the students, something inspiring or, you know, some advice. And my advice was, listen, before you take that first ethnic studies course that you're required to take, talk to your parents, your grandparents, your ancestors, your aunts and uncles, and learn about their past struggles, learn about what they went through and how they overcame those challenges. And you will be much more strengthened, emboldened, empowered to face your own challenges. So I believe in oral history. And as I said, I didn't know it had a name. Since I was 14 years old, I wanted to be a writer. I was at Presidio Junior High, and I was in taking an English, this was the English class, and they said, well, you know, what do you all want to be? And, you know, people had various exciting vocations that they dreamed of. But I said, I want to be a writer. But I never knew what I was going to write about, and because nobody would be interested in my grandparents' stories. I mean, I was in a class that was everybody who was from the same background, and actually I found out they weren't. They were much more international, but they were all white people, and we all studied the classic great books and what was considered good literature, and none of them had were stories of people of color. But anyway, I wanted to be a writer. So going back to my journey, but first of all, I want to say I love this format. I love being able to talk to you, and I hope to have, you know, some interchange and response. because I graduated from Mills College in English, but I never got an advanced degree. I'm called an independent historian because I've never written a thesis. I've done recordings of other people's stories, and let's say I've never been a professional educator. However, it's been very exciting to me to find out that what I've been doing is relevant and being used. And now I appeared on the PBS series, a 5-part series called Asian America. You may have seen it. And I was interviewed for the first episode to talk about, the Chinese Exclusion Law, which my parents and grandparents and ancestors endured, including, practically all Asians in America in the 19th century. Talked about that. And then I appeared at the end speaking at Promontory for the 150th anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. So the producer said, I want you to be bookends. You'd be the first part, just, a short story about me. And then at the very end to show a sense of triumph and empowerment, and the fact that, we are telling our own stories. So that was a great thrill for me. So I'm just going to talk about, I guess, from the beginning. First of all, I was born in Los Angeles in June 1941. 6 months later, I was a baby. I was in Whittier, California, a small town, and Pearl Harbor had just happened, and my father would soon be shipped off to overseas. He was a reserve officer and was a lieutenant, second lieutenant, promoted to first lieutenant, going to CBI, China, Burma, India. And I was living with my mother, my older sister, 3 years older, and my grandparents, my father's parents, who spoke only Chinese. And so I grew up, we were the only Chinese family in this all-white town, but I had the sensibility of being Chinese because of living with my grandparents. And so that was a great experience. I mean, it gave me a sense of who I was. I never forgot, despite of everything, that I was Chinese, and I came from pioneer immigrants. And I didn't feel any prejudice at that time. We were, first of all, U.S. and China were allies during World War II. Suddenly, we were the valiant Chinese fighting alongside the Americans. And I felt a great sense of, even as a child, patriotism. My father would send letters from the front, and my mother would read them to us. And I had my little charm bracelet with all these patriotic symbols. So that was waiting, for 3 years when my father was overseas. When he returned, he was a decorated major, and found out that the job as an engineer with a big company was not really open to him. They said, we don't really hire Chinese, permanently. You can come back temporarily, but there's a glass ceiling. So he realized that the future for a Chinese American engineer was not great. There was an opportunity to go to San Francisco and join his brother-in-law, George Hall. This is my mother's sister's husband, Uncle George, who had a formula for making soy sauce. And so we moved the family, by this time I had a baby brother, Alfred. So Alfred, Janie, and I, my parents, we moved to San Francisco, and our first home was a tiny apartment on Jackson Street in a tenement in Chinatown. And it was, after living in Whittier, I just hated it. As a child, I just said, there's no backyard. It's just And all night I could hear the sewing machines, you know, that we were right next to a sweatshop. And anyway, my father was struggling along, manufacturing soy sauce, and in a building on Sansom Street. And they were doing fairly well, and their customers were Chinatowns, were people in Chinatown. But my father said, we've got to move out of Chinatown. We were only there a year. And so this was a real challenge. In 1948, I mean, San Francisco was a city of enclaves. There was, you know, the Fillmore, there was Chinatown, there was the Mission, and there was, the rest were white business or white residential areas. My father saw that a chance to move to the Richmond district, because he said that this would be a wonderful place. It's affordable, it's a middle class, and there's a house that's available on a street on 37th Avenue between Balboa and Anza, right a few houses from a wonderful grammar school called Lafayette, and up the street was a public library. Oh, it'd be great for the kids. But the problem was they don't sell to Chinese. They don't sell to people of color, this district, all the Richmond. So he had regular meetings. He was a reserve officer, and his very good friend of the same rank was Major Keith Baring, who said, you know, I can help you. So Keith Baring bought this house, 674 37th Avenue, in his name, sold it to my father. And we were thrilled. However, and I didn't know about any of, I was a child, anything. I found out later, there was a petition being circulated, you know, in the neighborhood against us, you know, that we don't want them in the neighborhood. And it was, you know, I don't know what really transpired. However, it didn't work because we did move in, and the neighbors found out we weren't going to start a Hong war. And so we felt very, very welcome. I felt very, very welcome. And it was just wonderful having the grammar school next door. Went to the second grade, third grade, all the way to the sixth grade, Lafayette. And on my 7th birthday, I went outside to our new backyard. My father had been planting it, but beautiful camellias, and just making, you know, we were going to be really exemplary in this neighborhood. Anyway, I was by myself, and I saw the neighbor who was, this was a lovely couple, and they had grown children. The husband was an insurance salesman. He went to work every day in a suit. And the wife was this kindly, matronly woman who grew roses. She had prize-winning roses, and she was there trimming her roses that morning. And I said, oh, hello, good morning. You know, today's my birthday. And she said, oh, it is, that is so wonderful. And then she went out and she bought me a lovely, you know, doll that was in a cellophane box. And it was a princess doll. And I just felt, oh, I'm so happy. I just felt, love this neighborhood. So just to make a long story short, the conclusion is this. Years later, when I was engaged to be married, this lovely lady came to the house with a wedding gift for me and left. And my mother said, oh, you know that petition that was circulated against us when we tried to first move in? Well, it was that our lovely neighbor, she was the one who started that petition. So anyway, that was when I was an adult, and I began to realize a great deal. And we did face, when my husband and I tried to rent an apartment in 63, I got married right after I graduated from Mills College. We had a hard time because there were apartments that just, you know, they'd say, oh, it's rented already. And so I was very, very aware of this insidious prejudice that is not overt, but if people, and it's always about housing. It's like people don't want to live next to at this time. And this is very hard to imagine, because if you go to the Richmond district now, it's, well, first of all, I remember going in the 70s, it's all Chinese now, but now it's Pan-Asian, it's a very diverse, and you can buy any kind of condiment that you want of Asian or Middle Eastern condiment, different foods and restaurants. So anyway, I went to Lafayette High School. I'm sorry, Lafayette Middle School, Lafayette Elementary, and I loved it. And I loved the bust of Lafayette, right in the front. And I just felt, the friend to America, loved him. And so I'd like to show you, if I can just lift this up. This is my fourth grade class, Lafayette, you could see. I'm the only, you can see the one Chinese girl there. And there I am. And it's a lovely class. Nobody ever made fun of me or said, taunted me as they did in other places. I felt very included. It's just that fourth grade history is California history. And our big project for the class was making a paper mache map of California. And we had popsicle sticks, for all the 21 missions. And our great, what did they call it? Excursion was to go to Mission Dolores. And it was very exciting. We loved it. I did feel that it was just very negative toward Native Americans. It was terrible. It was Father Sierra conquered them. And I did remember that, well, my mother told me that my great grandfather worked on the Transcontinental Railroad. He came to California in 1866, and then on my father's side, my grandfather came really early, a year before the Exclusion Law, and became a worker and helped build, do agriculture. And so none of this, of course, nobody said anything about their immigrant past, and there were other immigrants of European background. We were all supposed to talk about, California and the conquest of people, and the success of the Big Four and Father Sarah. I just wanted to say a few things. I loved my classmates. On the top row, there's Jimmy, my closest friend sitting on next to me. This is Geraldine Fine. She was Jewish, and she just begged me to be Jewish. She said, Connie, you can be Jewish too. So I learned a lot of my civil rights and feelings of empowerment from my Jewish friends. And the top row, that's Jimmy Bennett. Jimmy Bennett, and his son is Naftali Bennett, Prime Minister of Israel. So Jimmy Bennett was from a gold rush family too, a pioneer family like mine. And so we had wonderful friends, and there was no bullying, and the boys and girls got along very well. It was just an unusual class, and I think it's because of our teachers, and maybe the neighborhood may be accepting us. And then I went to proceed. All of my schools were within walking distance. My father made this great move for us. By 1950, my father was called back to active duty. It was the Korean War, and he was promoted to lieutenant colonel. And people could see him walking in the house and to work and back in his army uniform. And so I felt a tremendous sense of belonging and patriotism, even though it was the Cold War and there was a very anti-Chinese feeling. And I think that what really gave me a sense of pride and feeling of culture was because of Chinatown, San Francisco, because my father was very involved with Chinatown Chamber of Commerce, and being a soy sauce manufacturer. He was working 2 jobs. He was going to Oakland Army Base, and then on weekends he'd be making soy sauce. But he also became a partner in a restaurant called Cans Restaurant, Cans of Grant Avenue. So it was the most fabulous thing when it opened. I could not believe it. I said, Daddy, we're going to be involved in a restaurant. He was a partner of Johnny Can, and the other partner was my Uncle George Hall. And so I would go into Cans as a kid and see celebrities, and the customers were all white people, and they were all famous. I saw Frank Sinatra. I met Kim Novak. Jimmy Stewart came to our table when we were having a family banquet. And there was my grandmother, 2 grandmothers, and he came and shook their hand. And I just felt this was, the people were coming to our restaurant that had Chinese pictures on it, and pictures of our pioneer past. Because Johnny Can commissioned Jake Lee, this famous painter, to paint 12 paintings of Chinese pioneers, and Chinese work on the railroad, Chinese in mining, Chinese in the winery, and Chinese in Deadwood, South Dakota, South Dakota, doing a fire hose race. So I felt people were coming because they loved our food. They were interested in our culture. And we had so much beauty to offer. And I was just thrilled. So I felt a great sense of pride. My father also was a parade chairman for the Lunar New Year Parade. And for 2 decades. And he was pageant chair for Miss Chinatown, U.S.A. And so I was, despite of the fact I wasn't learning anything about my culture, or the society did not praise our culture, I felt there it was. And so I think that when the veterans came back from World War II, there are a lot of Chinese American veterans. My father was in American Legion. They got together and spearheaded a campaign for a memorial in St. Mary's Square, and it's to fallen Chinese Americans in World War I and II. And a lot of people didn't even know that the Chinese served and that the Chinese could be patriots. But during this time and during the Cold War, my father said, we've got to show that we have paid in blood, that we have sacrificed, and we are patriots, because if we do not show this, if we get into war with China, look at what happened to Japanese Americans during World War II. So anyway, I remember the dedication ceremony and being so proud. There are all these dignitaries. My father gave a keynote address. There was General Whittemire, giving the keynote and the dedication. And of course, the mayor of San Francisco and representatives from the government. It was just very thrilling. So it was putting Chinatown into the American narrative. And I say Chinatown because Chinatown, San Francisco meant so much during the anti-Chinese movement. And I learned this much later doing research. Chinatowns up and down the West Coast were burned, people were driven out, including the Chinatown that my grandfather came to in San Jose. And it was really something for me to be involved in the apology last year by the city of San Jose to for past injustices toward Chinese, for the burning of the Chinatown and trying to prevent the Chinese from resettling again. But anyway, where did the Chinese go when they were driven out? Like from Tacoma, Washington, Eureka, Portland, Seattle, they came to Dai Fo, the Chinese word for big city. They came to San Francisco. That was a refuge. And my grandfather and great grandfather and grandmother, they were other relatives were in San Francisco during the earthquake. And when they fled Chinatown, they went to Oakland. And there was a time when the city said, we don't want a Chinatown back. We're going to try to take over Chinatown. The Chinese can move elsewhere. They can go to Oakland. They can go to Hunters Point. But the Chinese fought to stay, and they did. And thank goodness, because this is our Mecca. This is our city, and it belongs to, actually it belongs to everyone. So, but as I said, this is where I got my sensibility, and this is where I could come back and decide this is what I'm going to write about, all the struggles and the adventures and the glamour and glitz and the failures and triumphs of our people. And it did, our start came from when they first landed in the docks of San Francisco, and then returning, and then going out into the Richmond, into the suburbs. So I would like to, maybe have a discussion. I think that I've written books that have involved oral history. Everything that I've written has been not from, it has involved research, because Chinese immigration has a paper trail. So my book on Chinatown San Jose was based on oral history, photographs, and memorabilia from my father's friends who grew up. My father had passed away in 1990 when I wrote this book. And I had the wonderful stories from the people who lived there. And I had documentation, because people had documents because of the Chinese Exclusion Law. We all had to prove that we were legal in this country. And I had, by then I was involved with, I had already done a lot of work with the Angel Island Immigration Station, and doing research in the archives and finding testimonies and of Chinese immigrants, not just my own grandmother, although her case was so documented. My mother's mother, when the family moved to China my grandfather was on business. This is Grandpa Lee. He died in China at the age of 43. And so the family came back, my mother and her sisters and widowed grandmother Lee. And as soon as they arrived, this was 1924 in January, my grandmother was detained on Angel Island because she was an alien ineligible for citizenship, and she was a widow without status. She was separated from her American-born children. She was detained on Angel Island for 15 and a half months. And it took several appeals, including the appeal at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals to secure her release. And and one of the lawyers was this famous lawyer, Fickard, who was hired by my grandfather's former boss, who was Walter Haas. So, yeah, so we had, though these are the roots, yes, we had a lot of connections because we were here so early. My family was here so early. And when the people who stayed had allies. And yes, imagine my grandfather worked for Levi Strauss.
Wow.
Also pioneer, also with a Jewish background. So just an aside, during the earthquake centennial, 1906, there was a big celebration on I guess the top floor of Wells Fargo. And Warren Hillman wanted to invite the first families of the earthquake, just people, and he wanted to, he said there are people in Chinatown too. They hit, because people always think of the earthquake and, the people that were fleeing, they're all they're white society people, all dressed up in their hats and long skirts. Well, my relatives were also refugees. And so I was invited, my husband and I went, and Warren Hellman gave the speech saying, we should have a Chinese Jewish buffet, because this exemplifies our city, uh, our city celebration. Okay, I'll end with that.
Great. Thank you so much, Connie. That's an amazing story. And we can start our discussion. Everybody give her a big applause. I see that Colin Hussey has raised his.
Oh my goodness. I hear.
All right. Yes. You were talking about your father being in the Korea conflict. So was mine, by the way. And I was wondering if you were familiar with then Lieutenant Chu-Ween Lee. He was in the U.S. Marine Corps, eventually retired a major, but he was part of the Battle of Chosin Reservoir. And quite a story.
Yes, quite a story, and a legend, and certainly the Chinese Historical Society has featured his history, so it's great. No, but for a long time, we didn't hear stories of Chinese veterans, but recently there's been a movement. During World War II, the Chinese have received the Congressional Gold Medal for service during the time when their parents were excluded from citizenship, and so anyway.
There was a interesting. There's a really cool anecdote that during the Battle of Chosin Reservoir, where he was at the tip of the spear in Udam-ni, and at one point they were about to be overrun by the PLA forces, by the Human Sea of Chairman Mao, and what he did was he got real close to the enemy and would confuse them by he'd fire off shots, and then they'd respond, and then he'd shout in Mandarin, don't shoot, I'm Chinese. And he confused them so much that he was able to get his guys in his platoon to safety. He saved a lot of lives back then.
Oh, that's great. Wonderful to hear that. Yeah.
Susan, you have your hand up.
Well, first of all, Cannes was our favorite restaurant. And I remember that Danny Kaye would come and go in the kitchen and cook with Johnny Cannes chefs, etc. But I didn't know all of this about you. You have, as I said, an amazing and fascinating story. And lucky enough to have been a teacher where I had to teach at Commodore Stockton. So putting together some classes that I learned some of the history. I also learned it at Ellis Island Museum about our terrible Chinese Exclusion Act. But the names you dropped, you sat next to Naftali Bennett's father.
Oh, yes. Oh, he was in my class for 6 years.
Because I've been saying to people, like, this Prime Minister of Israel, his mom and dad went to Lowell, but now I know where they went to grammar school.
Oh,
so,
and also Jimmy went to Washington.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
UC Berkeley. Oh, nicest guy,
Nice to know. But I want to thank you, because this was a personal story grounded in history that a lot of us have never been taught. We didn't know. Some of us here who lived in San Francisco knew a little more, but I never knew about the earthquake group. So thank you for making me smarter and a better student of history.
Oh, and Susan, thank you for mentioning Danny Kaye. I have a picture of my father, cooking with Danny Kaye. Well, actually, Danny Kaye's wearing the hat, and I have, and my father's next to him, and Danny Kaye actually talked about cooking Chinese on his show. So we felt very proud. We just felt, getting the culture into the mainstream, that it wasn't just chop suey and all this, and all, people ridiculing Chinese food. And just, I think Connie Can was a wonderful, first of all, he's a great host, but he also had a mission, and that was to educate people toward, the cuisine and the fact that it there's a lot of meaning in every ingredient. He wrote a book called 8 Immortal Flavors, the first Chinese cookbook that made mainstream, and it had an introduction by James Beard. So all these things made us very, very proud, and it was very thrilling to meet Danny Kaye and to have him talk about and try to show us why Chinese cooking was superior, and cutting up things was so civilized, no knives at the table, so yeah, I'm glad you remember that. But I think that food and art came together, and my mother was a collector of Chinese art, and she was the one who told me a lot of stories and a lot of pride. She said, it's not about emperors, our culture, we're talking about Chinese American culture. It's people who worked. A lot of it was labor, Chinese railroad workers, Chinese growers, Chinese who made wine in the wine country, and Chinese who built roadways, and who worked in factories, and the painting that I loved at Cannes was this long painting, and it showed a fire hose race, a Chinese fire hose race in which they beat an American fire along, this was on foot, and this was in Deadwood, South Dakota, and this is a painting. And so it showed that Chinese weren't just confined to San Francisco. That was sort of their first and last refuge, but they tried to go settle wherever there was work, wherever they could live in America. So,
Thank you.
Carol, you have your finger raised, I believe.
Yes, thank you. I live in the Richmond district, and I love its cultural diversity in restaurants, mainly Chinese. And that's opened my eyes up to just a bouquet of flavors that I never experienced prior to that. And I wanted to ask you, since I live near Baker Beach and China Beach, does China Beach have relevance to your history?
well, it's because all the things where they say China, there were
Right.
Chinese there. There were Chinese docking there. There was a Chinese shrimp village. And it was because I think Chinese settled. There were also Chinese dominated the fishing industry because they were the first ones there. My grandfather, my mother's father, he was born in the United States. He worked in his father's business. They had an import-export store. They had dried shrimp. My grandfather had his own boat, and there are pictures in the archives showing Chinese sailing vessels with Chinese words on it and be the name of a company. So I'm just thinking of China Beach, China Cove, all these places where Chinese would dock, Chinese lived, and
Interesting.
yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Bill Buchanan. I see you raising, there you go.
Good morning, Connie, Bill Buchanan. Like you, I waved goodbye to my father when I was 2 years old, when he went off to fight the war in Western Pacific. Fortunately, came back. And then he took off again, right around 1950, to fight the Korean War. He was a Marine officer. And we Marine veterans well remember the stories about Major Lee. He was something else. But years ago, a small group of us used to paddle our ocean kayaks around the bay and sometimes out under the Golden Gate, but over to Angel Island. Really enjoyed touring, the buildings and especially some of the writings on the walls over there. But one day we went on up North Bay into the area around China Camp. And I remember getting out, stretching out a little bit, reading the state park bulletins, which is kind of boilerplate stuff. But I just wondered, in your writings, are you including any history about the China Camp up there where they do the shrimping?
No, I haven't. However, at the Cannes painting, if you go to the Chinese Historical Society, there is a large painting showing the China shrimp camp. So I'm just saying, in art, we try to tell the history. I was planning to write an essay to go with each painting and on the China camp. But I think it's a wonderful history, and it prospered a long time. During the earthquake, a lot of refugees managed to go for refuge in China camp. They were the fortunate ones that, had a place and relatives to stay. But there was a time when shrimp was so plentiful.
Yeah.
The shrimps have disappeared. But the shrimp would be hauled into to San Francisco, into Chinatown, and there'd be, people peeling the shrimp, and a lot of it would be dried and shipped to China.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions or Patricia?
Wonderful program, wonderful life, exciting to hear about it, horrified at some points, but you were obviously so vital and energetic. Apart from being actively involved, what do you do to have this vibrant personality and energy at this life? What are your secrets?
Well, I just feel, when I was speaking, okay, I kept saying, I hope I live long enough so that I could go to the 150th anniversary of the Transcontinental Railroad and recover this history that was denied during the centennial. Because my parents went to Promontory with the president of the Chinese Historical Society, Phil Choi. They were invited for the 100th anniversary of the Transcontinental Railroad, 1969. And at the last minute, when they were going to present a plaque, Phil Choi was going to present a plaque and make a statement. He was denied, saying, sorry, there's no time for you. And so that moment was gone when he said, oh, I could put the Chinese on the map. And the Secretary of Transportation at the time was John Volpe, who gave this oration saying, who but Americans could have built 10 miles of track in one day? Who but Americans could have built those tunnels through the Sierras? Who but Americans? So that moment launched a movement. And so it took 50 years, and I was involved with the Stanford Chinese Railroad Workers Project doing oral history of Descendents from 2012 to 2019. And I was invited to give the commencement speech at the 150th by the organizers of Spike 150. And up to that point, I was so paranoid and anxious. I thought, what if I get up to the podium? There were 20,000 people there. And somebody comes up to me and says, sorry, there's no time for you. But when I went there that day, this is May 10th, 2019, a glorious day before the pandemic, there was huge crowds of people there, 20,000 people, and a large group of Asian American descendants in the audience. And the preceding my talk, there was a lion dance, and then they were passing out these flyers. Everybody got one. There were thousands of flyers being passed out, and it was a replica of the great event poster, and on the back of it had a program, and there was on the top of the program it said commencement speech, Connie Young Yu. And I just thought, I can't believe it. I've worked hard for this point. I've hoped that I stayed alive and strong, and I delivered a speech and I was wearing my mother's Chinese dress that she had actually made 50 years ago. And I just felt this was the moment I had to just speak out, deliver this address, and feel, the energy from everyone. And I did it. And afterwards, someone said, oh, that was great. I think that you had ancestors up there helping you. And so that's been my feeling in my work, and to keep it going. And the energy I guess I get is, well, thank you for inviting me today so I could speak like this and feel the energy. but also, having students suddenly, come up and ask me to speak, and departments for Asian Pacific Islander Month, I had to give 6 presentations, half on Zoom. One was for NASA. And it's because, there's a purpose now to my work. And people knew that, we had to do something to address anti-Asian hate, to get to the roots of it, to understand this history that has been excluded. And if I could participate in this and contribute, with all that I've been given from my ancestors, I'm going to go ahead and keep doing it.
Okay, now, Connie, I want you to tell them one of the times when we interacted, please tell them where your daughter was and where you went to visit her and what work she was doing.
So my daughter is Jessica Yu. She's a film director. She won an Academy Award for Best Short Documentary, when she was really young, over 20 years ago, for Breathing Lessons, the life and work of Mark O'Brien, about a man in an iron lung. But anyway, so in July, I was invited. Jessica said, I want you to come over. I'm shooting this film in New Orleans. So my husband and I went to New Orleans July 1st and had dinner right away with Aquafina. And then was invited to dinner with Sandra Oh, and then to visit the set. So they're making a comedy, a film about 2 Asian American sisters, and it's a big film, and my daughter's directing it, and it's been wrapped up, and she's working on the editing, and this is mainstream because Will Ferrell's in it, so it's very exciting because she began by making documentaries. One of her early documentaries was on Chinatown, Chinatown San Jose. And so she started with that, and then that would be like a niche thing where nobody was interested except for Asian Americans. But gradually she started doing, she was recognized and doing, many documentaries on, like she did one on Henry Darger, an artist, and one on the sustainability of water. And then she got noticed to do this big feature. So very exciting. One of the few Chinese American women directors. And okay, I have to tell you, when she drove up to this, she was a guest director on a show. It was called The Morning Show with Jennifer Aniston. Yeah. So she did one of the episodes, and she drove up to the studio, and there's a parking spot for the director. So this was last year. She drives up, she parks the car, somebody taps on the window, and it's a very stalwart white guard who says, "Sorry, this is for the director. This parking spot is for the director." And she gets out of the car and she looks at him, she goes, "I know. It's hard for me too."
Bravo.
Wonderful.
I have a question.
Betty, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Connie, for your enthusiasm and your sharing of so much history that so many people don't know. Craig and I are both realtors and very active in the Association of Realtors. We have two gentlemen, and Richard Sachs. Where's Richard? He's there as well. We know John Wong and Alan Okamoto, who started many years ago the Asian Real Estate Association of America. And they have a beautiful, and you may have already seen it, beautiful kind of a little introduction documentary of both of their respective histories, John being Chinese and Alan being Japanese. And one of the stories of Alan is that his father was never admitted to the Realtor Association in San Francisco because he was Japanese. Later, when Alan Okamoto, the son, was installed as the president of the San Francisco Association of Realtors, he told that story of his father and how they had been sent to the camps and so forth. And I mean, we're all in tears. And these two gentlemen have done so much. There's also a Chinese Real Estate Association that we are all members of, and Craig as well. So we very much are working on this kind of along with you to make it more out in the, to really encourage and to acknowledge the contributions. In fact, there's a movie series that's starting tonight that from San Francisco Association of Realtors on something about the wealth gap, probably more in terms of the Black people, but they've done this before. We have a big diversity program. So maybe we can have you come and speak sometime to the association because you have a wealth of knowledge.
Thank you, Debbie. And I think it's important that we keep educating new immigrants who have a lot of wealth.
Yeah.
New Asian immigrants who are in tech and who could buy many houses at once. And we have to talk to and actually now, because of the anti-Asian hate, there's a much more solidarity that we feel, okay, it is about the way we look. And we do have a connection with you, despite of the disparity of income. So it's a matter of communication and mutual understanding.
So thank you.
All right, any other, Craig?
Connie, I just want to thank you so much for joining us because, you're like a time pod in a way, right? You really tie in the old, historical character, and I admire the Chinese community so much. I see so many, just through history. I mean, you talk about a group of people that have been so beat down and have had so many challenges, and at the end of the day, the Chinese just roll up their sleeves, they get to work, and they make something out of themselves. And so, it's great to see, and I'm so proud of our Chinese heritage. I love Chinatown in San Francisco, and I read Jade Snow Wong's book, The Fifth Chinese Daughter. It was that was awesome. So anyway, I just have to applaud you for joining us this morning.
Oh, thank you. Yes. I know she was one of the first to show people, talk about everyday life of Chinese people, family life. And that was very important.
Her dad wasn't too crazy about her doing that.
That's right. I know there are a lot of struggles. And, when I think about the women's story, it's very different because for a long time, it was a male dominated society. Because of the fact that there were all these laws, and so it was the matriarch, all the family associations and the 6 companies, all men controlled it. So but gradually things changed, and I think a lot. The revolution led by Sun Yat-sen, and this is another side story. Sun Yat-sen raised his money for the revolution in China from working people in America. And my grandfather in San Jose was in the secret society to overthrow the Manchu dynasty. And there was so much sacrifice of people who said, we want China to be a republic. We feel there's no respect for Chinese people, that even though we're overseas and we're so oppressed, and the reason why they became so much more involved with Chinese politics, Chinese were not allowed to vote in America. They excluded from American society. So they clung to their institutions, fiercely, and also that gave them a sense of pride. So with the revolution succeeding in China, U.S. and China also had a much more mutual relationship, and women had a better status during that time too. No more binding of feet.
Oh, that's right.
Very cool. Connie, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate the free lesson, and thank you, and hopefully you'll join us again sometime.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Christine, you have a question?
I just very, very briefly wanted to say thank you to Connie. It's so moving and powerful that you came to the meeting this morning and shared so much from the heart and the soul and from your background. It's very, very special. And you're making the effort to do that with us has been just very moving and meaningful to me. There's a lot I'll follow up on pursuant to your presentation. Thank you.
I love hearing from you too.
Okay, everybody, it's almost 9 o'clock. We're gonna, Connie, thank you. You're welcome to stay and chat with us. So we'll leave the room open. I've got to leave myself, so Pete will be the host going forward until he has to leave. And then whoever's last in the room, please be sure to turn off the lights. And
Thank you. Thank you. And
Tony, I'll be leaving shortly myself, actually.
all right, so if everybody, again, we'll leave the doors open and anybody can stay around. Pete, just leave and whoever, Susan or whoever's left in the room, if they want to hang around.
Okay, I'm going to have to run, but Connie, thank you. I put you on the spot, but I knew that this was the spot that you would shine. And I thank you.
Yes. Connie, would it be possible to get in touch with you in the future? Did you leave some contact information?
I'll leave it with Susan. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll share it with you.
Okay.
Very
I've
much.
got to run. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Bye.
Bye.
Georgia.
Okay.
We'll go ahead and close it out.